The early morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as King Charles III stood before his bedroom window, watching the final preparations for what would become one of the most significant military ceremonies of his reign. The date was June 17th, 2023, and today marked the first time he would personally present new military colors to 5 regiments of the British Army as their sovereign. Charles had been awake since 5 in the morning, unable to sleep due to the weight of responsibility he felt. This was not just another royal duty. It was a sacred tradition that connected him directly to centuries of British military history. The ceremony of presenting colors dated back to the 17th century, when these silk flags served as rally points for soldiers in the chaos of battle. Now, they represented the honor, tradition, and sacrifice of each regiment. His valet, Thomas, had laid out the ceremonial uniform the night before. The scarlet tunic of the Welsh Guards, adorned with golden braiding and polished buttons, hung perfectly pressed. The bearskin hat sat on its stand, its plume pristine white. Charles had worn similar uniforms countless times as Prince of Wales, but today felt different. Today, he wore them as king. As he dressed, Charles reflected on the 5 regiments that would receive their new colors. The 1st Battalion Welsh Guards, his own regiment, held special significance. He had served as their colonel-in-chief for decades, watching young men grow into seasoned soldiers, attending their homecomings and, sadly, their funerals. The 1st Battalion Coldstream Guards, the 1st Battalion Irish Guards, F Company Scots Guards, and No. 7 Company Coldstream Guards each had their own proud history stretching back centuries. The ceremony would take place in the quadrangle of Windsor Castle, a location chosen for its historical significance and practical considerations. The ancient walls had witnessed countless royal ceremonies, from medieval tournaments to modern state occasions. Today, they would echo with the sound of military bands, marching feet, and the proud voices of soldiers taking their oath of allegiance. Lady Sarah, Charles's private secretary, knocked gently on the door. "Your Majesty, the final briefing is ready in the blue drawing room." Charles nodded, straightening his tunic one last time. The briefing would cover the precise timing of the ceremony, the order of presentations, and the specific protocols for each moment of the event. Walking through the corridors of the palace, Charles passed portraits of his predecessors who had performed this same duty. His mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had presented colors dozens of times during her 70-year reign. His grandfather, King George VI, had continued the tradition even during the darkest days of World War II. Each monarch had understood that this ceremony represented something far greater than pageantry. It was about honoring the covenant between sovereign and soldier. In the blue drawing room, military officials and palace staff had gathered around a large table covered with detailed diagrams. Colonel James Henderson of the Welsh Guards, a veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq, stood to attention as Charles entered. The other regimental representatives followed suit, their uniforms immaculate, their bearing proud despite the early hour. "Gentlemen," Charles began, his voice carrying the authority of kingship, but retaining the warmth that had characterized his decades of military involvement. "Today we honor not just these 5 regiments, but every man and woman who has served under these colors. We carry forward a tradition that speaks to the very heart of duty, sacrifice, and service to country." The briefing proceeded methodically. The ceremony would begin at precisely 10 o'clock with the arrival of the King's Guard of Honor. The household cavalry would provide the musical backdrop, their brass instruments gleaming in the morning sun. Each regiment would march forward in order of precedence, their old colors cased and ready to be retired, their new colors waiting to be blessed and presented. Colonel Henderson explained the significance of the new colors themselves. Made of the finest silk, each flag had been hand-embroidered by skilled craftswomen over months of meticulous work. The regimental crests, battle honors, and royal ciphers were stitched with golden thread that caught light like small suns. These were not mere symbols. They were repositories of history, carrying the names of battles from Waterloo to Helmand Province. Charles listened intently as the protocol officer explained his movements during the ceremony. He would inspect each regiment received their new colors from the Dean of Windsor, bless them with words that dated back centuries, and then present them to the commanding officers. The weight of each moment had been carefully choreographed, yet Charles knew that the true power of the ceremony lay not in its precision, but in its meaning. The final preparation involved checking the weather forecast one last time. June in England could be unpredictable, but today promised clear skies and gentle winds, perfect conditions for the ceremony. The flags would fly proudly without the concern of rain or excessive wind that might complicate the proceedings. As the briefing concluded, Charles felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and responsibility that came before significant royal duties. This was not his first military ceremony, nor would it be his last, but each one carried its own weight of history and expectation. The soldiers who would receive these colors had trained for months, their drill movements practiced until they became second nature. Outside, the sound of military vehicles arriving at Windsor Castle could be heard through the windows. The regiments were beginning to assemble, their soldiers arriving in coaches from their barracks across the country. Soon, the castle grounds would be filled with the controlled chaos of military preparation. Uniforms being checked one final time, instruments being tuned, and officers ensuring every detail met the exacting standards expected for a royal ceremony. Charles made his way to his private study for a few moments of quiet reflection before the ceremony began. On his desk lay a leather-bound folder containing brief histories of each regiment and personal messages from their commanding officers. He opened it carefully, reading words that spoke of pride, dedication, and the honor they felt in receiving their new colors from their sovereign. The 1st Battalion Welsh Guards message particularly moved him. Their commanding officer wrote of the regiment's recent deployment to Eastern Europe as part of NATO's enhanced forward presence, their role in training Ukrainian forces, and their continued readiness to serve wherever duty called. These were not ceremonial soldiers, but active warriors who would carry their new colors into whatever challenges the future might bring. Similar stories emerged from each regiment's letter. The Irish Guards spoke of their counterterrorism work in Northern Ireland, their humanitarian missions in Africa, and their pride in representing the crown around the world. The Coldstream Guards detailed their ceremonial duties at Buckingham Palace alongside their operational deployments, emphasizing the dual nature of modern foot guards regiments. As 9:30 approached, Charles could hear the sound of military bands beginning their warm-up exercises in the distance. The Household Cavalry Band, resplendent in their scarlet tunics and distinctive helmets, would provide the musical framework for the ceremony. Their repertoire included traditional military marches, regimental quick marches, and the solemn hymns that would accompany the blessing of the colors. Thomas appeared one final time to ensure every detail of the king's uniform was perfect. The golden aiguillettes were properly positioned, the metal ribbons aligned precisely, and the ceremonial sword hung at exactly the correct angle. Charles had learned long ago that in military ceremonies, perfection in dress was not vanity, but respect for the institution, the traditions, and the men and women who served. Standing before the mirror, King Charles III saw not just his own reflection, but the culmination of a lifetime of military involvement. From his early days as a young naval officer to his decades as colonel-in-chief of numerous regiments, the military had been central to his understanding of service and duty. Today's ceremony would mark another milestone in that relationship, another moment where the ancient bond between monarch and military would be renewed and strengthened. The sound of marching feet on cobblestones announced that the regiments were taking their positions in the quadrangle. Soon, he would walk out to meet them, carrying with him not just the weight of the crown, but the hopes and expectations of every soldier who would kneel to receive their new colors. The ceremony that was about to begin would last 2 hours, but its significance would endure for generations. The quadrangle of Windsor Castle had been transformed into a magnificent parade ground, its ancient stones now hosting one of the most elaborate military ceremonies of the year. 500 soldiers stood in perfect formation, their scarlet tunics creating geometric patterns against the gray castle walls. The morning sun, now higher in the sky, illuminated the scene with a golden light that seemed to bring the very stones to life. King Charles emerged from the King's Tower at precisely 10 o'clock, his appearance met by the thunderous crash of drums and the sharp notes of military trumpets. The household cavalry band, positioned along the eastern wall of the quadrangle, began the ceremonial march that would accompany his inspection of the troops. Every movement had been rehearsed countless times, yet the electricity of the actual moment gave everything a heightened intensity. The King's Guard of Honor, drawn from the Coldstream Guards, presented arms as Charles approached. Their bearskin hats moved in perfect unison, a wave of black fur and gleaming brass that rippled across the formation. The regimental sergeant major, his voice carrying across the courtyard with the authority earned through 30 years of service, called the regiment to attention. The sound of 500 heels clicking together on stone echoed off the castle walls like a single, sharp thunderclap. Charles began his inspection with the Welsh Guards, his own regiment, and the first to receive their new colors. As he walked along the ranks, he paused occasionally to speak with individual soldiers. To a young guardsman barely 20 years old, he asked about his family and his training. To a veteran sergeant with 3 operational tours behind him, he inquired about his recent service in Estonia. These personal moments, brief though they were, represented something vital about the relationship between sovereign and soldier. It was not merely institutional, but deeply human. Lance Corporal Davies, standing ramrod straight in the front rank, had served in Afghanistan and Iraq. When the king paused before him, Charles recognized the metal ribbons on his chest and spoke quietly about the challenges faced by veterans returning home. Davies later recounted that the king's knowledge of his service and genuine concern for his welfare made him proud to serve under the new colors that would soon be presented. The inspection continued with mathematical precision. Each regiment had been positioned according to strict protocol, with the senior regiment, the Coldstream Guards, holding the position of honor on the right of the line. The Welsh Guards, Irish Guards, and Scots Guards followed an order of precedence established centuries ago. Every soldier had spent hours preparing for this moment, boots polished to mirror brightness, brass fittings gleaming, uniforms pressed to perfection. As Charles moved through the ranks, military photographers captured images that would become part of historical record. These photographs would join countless others documenting similar ceremonies stretching back to the Victorian era. In years to come, these soldiers would show their grandchildren pictures of the day their king presented their regiment with new colors, continuing a tradition of military service that often passed from father to son, mother to daughter. The Dean of Windsor, dressed in his ceremonial robes, stood ready beside the altar that had been erected in the center of the quadrangle. Upon it lay 5 sets of new colors, each folded with precise military creases and awaiting the blessing that would transform them from silk and thread into sacred military symbols. The morning breeze stirred the edges of the altar cloth, creating gentle movements that seemed to bring anticipation to the very air. Behind the assembled regiments, invited guests filled temporary seating that had been erected along the castle walls. Military families, regimental veterans, and local dignitaries watched with expressions of pride and solemnity. Many of the elderly veterans wore their own military medals, earned in conflict from the Falklands to Afghanistan. Their presence created a living link between the soldiers on parade and the generations who had served before them. Mrs. Margaret Thompson, whose grandson stood in the ranks of the Irish Guards, had traveled from Belfast for the ceremony. Her own husband had served in the same regiment during the Second World War, receiving the Military Cross for actions in Normandy. As she watched her grandson stand to attention in his scarlet tunic, she saw not just a young man, but a continuation of family tradition that stretched back generations. The new colors being presented today would fly over soldiers who carried in their hearts the same values of duty and sacrifice that had motivated their predecessors. The military bands provided a soundtrack that elevated the ceremony beyond mere procedure into something approaching the sacred. The traditional military marches, composed centuries ago to inspire soldiers marching into battle, now serve to honor those who continued that tradition in the modern world. The music seemed to speak of continuity and change, of ancient traditions adapted to contemporary realities. Colonel Henderson, commanding the Welsh Guards, stood at the head of his regiment with decades of experience etched into every line of his bearing. He had received his own new colors as a young lieutenant 25 years earlier, and now he would lead his soldiers in accepting theirs from their king. The weight of responsibility he felt was immense. These colors would guide his soldiers through whatever challenges lay ahead, from ceremonial duties at royal palaces to operational deployments in hostile territories. The ceremony's choreography required split-second timing. Military tradition demanded that every movement be executed with precision, every word spoken at the correct moment, every salute given with proper form. Yet beneath this rigid structure lay something more fluid and organic, the genuine emotion felt by soldiers receiving symbols that connected them to their regimental history and to each other. As the inspection neared completion, Charles returned to his position at the head of the assembled regiments. The household cavalry band transitioned into a more solemn melody, signaling the approaching moment when the colors would be blessed. The Dean of Windsor stepped forward, his voice carrying across the courtyard as he began the ancient words that would consecrate these flags for military service. The blessing ceremony itself drew upon traditions that predated written history. Warriors had carried sacred symbols into battle since ancient times, believing that their banners connected them to divine protection and ancestral strength. The Christian prayers spoken over the colors continued this tradition, asking for divine blessing upon the soldiers who would serve under them and upon the missions they would undertake. Each set of colors told its own story through the battle honors embroidered upon them. The names of famous engagements, Waterloo, Ypres, Normandy, Goose Green, spoke of moments when ordinary men had displayed extraordinary courage. The new colors would carry these honors forward while accumulating new ones as the regiments continued their service in an uncertain world. Young soldiers in the ranks, some experiencing their first major ceremony, felt the weight of history settling upon their shoulders. They understood that they were not merely receiving new flags, but accepting guardianship of military traditions that had been purchased with the blood of their predecessors. The colors they were about to receive would accompany them on training exercises, ceremonial parades, and operational deployments, serving as constant reminders of the standards they were expected to maintain. The international dimension of the ceremony was reflected in the presence of military attaches from allied nations. Representatives from the United States, Canada, Australia, and other Commonwealth countries watched as Britain's newest monarch performed one of his most traditional military duties. Their presence emphasized the global nature of modern military cooperation and the continuing relevance of ceremonial traditions in building international relationships. As the blessing reached its conclusion, the Dean of Windsor sprinkled holy water upon each set of colors while speaking words that commissioned them for service. The symbolism was powerful. These pieces of silk were being transformed into something sacred, something worthy of the ultimate sacrifice, if necessary. The silence that fell over the assembled crowd at this moment was profound, broken only by the distant sound of London traffic beyond the castle walls. The moment had arrived for the actual presentation of the colors. King Charles stepped forward to receive the first set from the Dean, beginning a process that would see him personally place these sacred symbols into the hands of the regimental representatives. The weight of history, tradition, and expectation seemed to concentrate into this single moment, as monarch and soldier came together in a ceremony unchanged in its essentials for 3 centuries. The moment King Charles lifted the first set of new colors from the altar marked the ceremony's transformation from preparation to sacred ritual. The silk flags, heavy with golden embroidery and weighted by centuries of tradition, seemed to capture the morning light and hold it within their folds. As he turned to face the Welsh Guards, his own regiment, The significance of the moment was reflected in the absolute stillness that had fallen over the assembled crowd. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison stepped forward to receive the Welsh Guards colors on behalf of his regiment. A veteran of 3 operational tours, Morrison had dreamed of this moment since joining the regiment as a young officer 15 years earlier. The colors he was about to receive would replace those that had served the regiment for 25 years, accompanying them through the troubles in Northern Ireland, deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, and countless ceremonial duties at royal palaces. By the grace of God and in the name of our ancient traditions, Charles began, his voice carrying clearly across the quadrangle, I present these colors to the 1st Battalion Welsh Guards. May they inspire courage in battle, comfort in sorrow, and pride in service. The words, largely unchanged for 3 centuries, connected this moment to countless similar ceremonies that had taken place in castle courtyards, on parade grounds, and even on battlefields around the world. Morrison received the colors with both hands, the weight of the silk and its wooden staff immediately apparent. As he held them aloft for his regiment to see, 500 Welsh Guardsmen presented arms in perfect unison, their rifles creating a forest of steel that caught and reflected the morning sun. The moment was photographed by dozens of cameras, creating images that would be treasured by military families and historians alike. The ceremony continued with the Coldstream Guards, the senior regiment of foot guards whose history stretched back to the English Civil War. Major Sarah Fletcher, the first female officer to receive colors on behalf of the Coldstream Guards, stepped forward with the bearing that had carried her through 2 decades of distinguished service. Her presence represented the evolution of military tradition, honoring the past while embracing the changes necessary for the future. Charles's presentation to Major Fletcher carried special significance, not just because she was making history as the first woman to receive Coldstream Guards colors, but because her father had served in the same regiment during the Falklands War. The colors she now held would carry forward a family tradition while breaking new ground for future generations of female officers. The applause from the assembled crowd was warm and sustained recognition of both her personal achievement and the broader changes occurring within the British military. The Irish Guards followed, their emerald plumes distinctive among the sea of white and red adorning the other regiments. Captain Michael O'Brien, whose grandfather had won the Victoria Cross serving with the Irish Guards during the Second World War, received their colors with hands that trembled slightly with emotion. The weight of family expectation and regimental pride combined to make this moment profoundly personal for him and the soldiers under his command. Each presentation followed the same format, yet each carried its own emotional weight. The Scots Guards colors were received by Major William MacLeod, whose Highland accent made the traditional response resonate with particular authenticity. The final presentation to F Company Coldstream Guards was received by Captain David Thompson, the youngest officer to participate in the ceremony at just 28 years old. Between each presentation, the Household Cavalry Band played the appropriate regimental march. The stirring notes of Men of Harlech accompanied the Welsh Guards, while Milanalo honored the Coldstream Guards. These melodies, familiar to every soldier in their respective regiments, seemed to speak of shared experiences and common purpose that transcended individual differences. The emotional impact of the ceremony was evident in the faces of the watching families. Wives wiped tears from their eyes as they watched their husbands receive symbols that might one day accompany them into danger. Children, many too young to fully understand the significance of the moment, sensed its importance from the solemnity of their parents. Elderly veterans, some in wheelchairs but wearing their old regiment ties and blazers, remembered their own experiences of receiving colors decades earlier. Private James Mitchell of the Irish Guards, standing in the front rank, felt the weight of history as his regiment's new colors were unfurled for the first time. He had joined the army to escape limited opportunities in his hometown, but now found himself part of something larger and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. The colors now flying above his head would become as familiar to him as his own family, symbols of belonging and purpose that would sustain him through whatever challenges lay ahead. The ceremony's religious dimension was emphasized when the Dean of Windsor led a prayer for the soldiers who would serve under these colors. His words spoke of protection for those who would carry them into danger, wisdom for their commanders, and comfort for their families. The prayer connected the military values of courage and sacrifice to broader spiritual principles, acknowledging that soldiers serve causes greater than themselves. As each set of colors was presented, they were immediately unfurled and held high by color parties comprised of the regiment's most experienced non-commissioned officers. These senior soldiers, many with decades of service behind them, understood better than anyone the responsibility they were accepting. The colors they now held would become the focal point of regimental life, present at every important ceremony and deployment, symbols of continuity that connected past, present, and future. The international guests present at the ceremony observed traditions that had been exported around the world during the height of the British Empire. Military officers from former colonies watched ceremonies that their own armies had adapted to their particular circumstances and cultures. The presentation of military colors had become a global tradition, carried to every continent by soldiers who understood the power of symbols to build unit cohesion and fighting spirit. Charles himself seemed deeply moved by each presentation. His long experience with military ceremonies had not diminished his appreciation for their significance. As he handed each set of colors to its receiving officer, he made eye contact and spoke brief personal words of encouragement and recognition. These private moments, captured by photographers but inaudible to the wider audience, represented the personal dimension of military leadership that complemented its institutional aspects. The complexity of organizing such a ceremony was evident in its flawless execution. Months of planning had gone into ensuring that every detail was perfect, from the positioning of the bands to the timing of each presentation. Military staff officers had coordinated with palace officials to create an event that honored tradition while meeting the practical requirements of modern security and media coverage. Weather had been a constant concern in the weeks leading up to the ceremony. British summer weather is notoriously unpredictable, and rain or high winds could have disrupted the careful choreography of the event. The clear skies and gentle breeze that blessed the ceremony seemed almost providential, allowing the new colors to fly freely and the assembled soldiers to maintain their immaculate appearance. As the final set of colors was presented, the ceremony reached its emotional climax. 5 sets of new flags now flew proudly above their respective regiments, silk banners that would guide these soldiers through the challenges of the coming decades. The old colors, many showing signs of their years of faithful service, had been respectfully cased and would be retired to regimental museums where future generations could learn of their service. The moment called for reflection on the nature of military service and the role of ceremony in maintaining military effectiveness. Critics sometimes questioned the relevance of ancient traditions in modern warfare, but the soldiers standing in perfect ranks understood that these ceremonies strengthened the bonds that held their units together. The colors they had just received would accompany them on training exercises and operational deployments, constant reminders of the standards expected of those who served under them. The ceremony was approaching its conclusion, but its impact would resonate for years to come. New soldiers joining these regiments would learn to respect and honor these colors, while veterans would carry memories of this day throughout their lives. The bond between monarch and military had been renewed and strengthened, ensuring that the ancient covenant between crown and sword would continue into the future. With all 5 sets of colors now presented and blessed, the ceremony moved into its final phase, the spectacular trooping that would allow the assembled regiments to display their new symbols before King Charles and the watching crowd. The Household Cavalry Band struck up the opening notes of the combined march past, a complex musical arrangement that would accompany one of the most impressive military displays of the year. The Welsh Guards, as the King's own regiment, held the honor of leading the march past. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, now carrying his regiment's new colors, gave the command that set 500 soldiers into motion with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The scarlet tunics moved in perfect waves across the quadrangle, each step taken in exact time with a military band's rhythm. The sound of boots on cobblestone created its own percussion, a steady beat that seemed to echo the heartbeat of military tradition itself. Charles stood at attention as his former regiment passed before him, the new colors flying proudly at their head. The emotional connection between monarch and soldier was evident in his expression as he watched young men he had inspected just hours earlier, now marching with the confidence and precision that marked them as among Britain's finest soldiers. Many of these guardsmen would go on to serve in the king's personal protection details, their loyalty and skill tested through years of rigorous training and operational service. The crowd of invited guests rose to their feet as the parade commenced, recognizing the extraordinary discipline and training required to achieve such precise movements. Military families watched with particular intensity, knowing that the soldiers they saw marching in perfect formation might soon be deployed to distant countries where precision and teamwork could mean the difference between life and death. Sergeant Major Williams of the Welsh Guards, a 28-year veteran with service in every major British military operation since the Falklands, called the timing of each movement with a voice that could be heard clearly above the band music. His commands, honed through decades of parade ground training, guided his soldiers through the complex maneuvers that had been rehearsed countless times in preparation for this moment. The Coldstream Guards followed, their performance particularly watched by military historians present at the ceremony. As the senior regiment of Foot Guards, their movements served as the standard by which all other regiments would be judged. Major Fletcher, carrying their colors with obvious pride, led her soldiers in a display that honored their ancient traditions while demonstrating their modern capabilities. The regiment's long history, stretching back to General Monk's regiment of foot in 1650, seemed to march alongside them in the form of battle honors embroidered on their colors. Each regiment brought its own character to the march past. The Irish Guards, with their emerald plumes and spirited interpretation of their regimental march, displayed the fighting spirit that had earned them distinction in 2 world wars and countless smaller conflicts. Their colors, freshly blessed and heavy with golden thread, caught the sunlight as they moved through the complex maneuvers that would take them past the reviewing stand 3 separate times. The Scots Guards provided perhaps the most stirring moment of the march past, when their pipe band joined the household cavalry musicians in playing Highland Laddie, their regimental march. The skirl of bagpipes echoing off the ancient castle walls created an almost otherworldly atmosphere that transported observers back through centuries of military history. Captain MacLeod, bearing his regiment's colors, seemed to embody the Highland warrior tradition that had made Scottish soldiers legendary throughout the world. The final regiment, F Company Coldstream Guards, brought the march past to its conclusion with a display of precision that demonstrated why the Guards Division remained the standard for military excellence. Captain Thompson, the youngest officer to receive colors that day, led his soldiers with the confidence of someone much older, his leadership style already showing the influence of the traditions he was now charged with maintaining. The complexity of the march past extended beyond simple forward movement. The regiments performed intricate wheeling movements that required split-second timing and absolute trust between soldiers. When the command by the right, "Quick march," rang across the quadrangle, hundreds of soldiers pivoted as one, creating geometric patterns that seemed to flow like water across the parade ground. King Charles, himself a former military officer, appreciated the technical skill required to execute such movements flawlessly. His naval training had taught him the importance of precision and teamwork, values that were clearly evident in the performance of the soldiers passing before him. The hours of practice required to achieve such standards spoke to the dedication and professionalism that characterized the modern British military. The emotional impact of the ceremony was perhaps most evident in the faces of the regimental veterans watching from the guest seating. Men and women who had served under previous versions of these colors watched their successors with expressions of pride mixed with nostalgia. Many had served in conflicts that tested their courage and cost them friends, experiences that gave them deep appreciation for the traditions being honored that day. Colonel, retired, Michael Stevens, who had commanded the Irish Guards during the Falklands War, watched the march past with tears in his eyes. The young soldiers passing before him carried the same spirit and determination that had characterized his own generation, but they faced different challenges in a rapidly changing world. The colors they now bore would guide them through whatever trials lay ahead, just as earlier versions had guided their predecessors through the conflicts of previous decades. The international dimension of British military traditions was represented by the foreign military attaches present at the ceremony. Officers from the United States, Canada, Australia, and other allied nations observed practices that had influenced military ceremonies around the world. The presentation of colors had become a global military tradition, adapted to local customs and requirements, but maintaining its essential character as a symbol of unit pride and military effectiveness. Media coverage of the ceremony ensured that its impact would extend far beyond the walls of Windsor Castle. Television cameras captured images that would be broadcast around the world, showing international audiences the continuing relevance of military tradition in contemporary Britain. These images would join archives documenting similar ceremonies stretching back through decades of royal history. The march past concluded with all 5 regiments forming a massive square in the center of the quadrangle, their colors flying at the center of each formation. The sight of 1,000 soldiers standing in perfect silence, their new colors stirring gently in the morning breeze, created a moment of profound stillness that seemed to capture the essence of military service, discipline, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to duty. Charles prepared to deliver the final address of the ceremony, words that would formally conclude the presentation, but begin these regiments' service under their new colors. His speech would acknowledge the significance of the moment while looking forward to the challenges these soldiers would face in the years ahead. The ancient words of military tradition would be joined with contemporary recognition of the complex security environment in which these regiments would operate. The ceremony had lasted nearly 2 hours, but its impact would endure for the lifetime of every soldier present. The colors they had received would become central to their military identity, symbols of belonging and purpose that would sustain them through training, operations, and the inevitable challenges of military life. The bonds forged between these regiments and their sovereign would strengthen over time, creating relationships that transcended the ceremonial moment to become part of the living fabric of British military tradition. As the final phase of the ceremony approached, the assembled crowd prepared for the concluding moments that would send these soldiers back to their duties, carrying symbols blessed by their king and hallowed by centuries of military service. The transformation from preparation to presentation was nearly complete, but the true test of these colors would come in the years ahead as they guided new generations of soldiers through whatever challenges the future might bring. King Charles stood before the assembled regiments for his final address, the weight of monarchy and military tradition combining in a moment that would define his relationship with the armed forces for years to come. The 1,000 soldiers arranged in perfect formation before him represented not just 5 regiments, but the entire British military establishment, and his words would carry far beyond the walls of Windsor Castle to barracks, bases, and operational theaters around the world. "Soldiers of the Guard," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the quadrangle without amplification. "Today you have received colors that connect you to centuries of military service and sacrifice. These are not merely symbols of silk and gold, but sacred trusts that carry within their folds the honor of every man and woman who has served before you and the hopes of those who will serve after you." The silence that greeted his words was profound, broken only by the distant sound of traffic on the London road and the occasional call of birds nesting in the castle's ancient towers. 500 pairs of eyes focused on their sovereign with the intensity that comes from shared purpose and mutual respect. These soldiers understood that they were witnessing history, participating in a ceremony that would be remembered long after their own service had concluded. Charles continued, his words carefully chosen to honor tradition while acknowledging contemporary realities. The world you serve in today presents challenges unknown to your predecessors. The threats you face may be different, but the values you embody remain constant. Courage, duty, honor, and sacrifice. These are the pillars upon which military service has always rested, and they will guide you through whatever trials lie ahead. In the guest seating, military families listened with particular attention to words that spoke directly to their own experiences and concerns. The wives and children of serving soldiers understood better than most that military life involved sacrifice, not just from those who wore the uniform, but from entire families who supported them. The colors being honored that day would accompany their loved ones to places where danger was real and separation inevitable. Mrs. Jennifer Walsh, whose husband served as a company sergeant major in the Welsh Guards, felt the truth of the king's words in her own life. 3 operational deployments had tested her family's resilience, but they had also strengthened their appreciation for the military community that supported them. The ceremony she was witnessing represented more than pageantry. It was a renewal of the covenant that bound military families together in service to something greater than themselves. The king's address took on a more personal tone as he spoke directly about his own relationship with the military. I have had the privilege of serving alongside many of you, of visiting you in operational theaters, and of sharing in both your triumphs and your sorrows. The bond between crown and military is not abstract, but deeply personal, built through shared experience and mutual commitment to the service of our nation. These words resonated particularly strongly with the veterans present at the ceremony. Men and women who had served during Charles's decades as heir to the throne remembered his visits to their units, his genuine interest in their welfare, and his advocacy for military causes. Unlike monarchs who had inherited the throne at young ages, Charles brought to his role decades of experience working with the armed forces. Colonel Henderson reflected on the king's words while maintaining his position at the head of the Welsh Guards. He remembered Charles's visit to his unit during their deployment to Afghanistan, when the then Prince of Wales had spent time with soldiers in forward operating bases, sharing meals and listening to their concerns. That personal engagement had created bonds of loyalty that went far beyond ceremonial obligation. The practical implications of the ceremony extended far beyond the immediate moment. The colors presented that day would guide these regiments through the challenging years ahead as Britain adapted to new strategic realities. The soldiers standing in formation would deploy to Eastern Europe as part of NATO's enhanced forward presence, train partner forces in Africa and the Middle East, and maintain the operational readiness that underpinned British defense capabilities. Charles addressed these future challenges directly. The colors you carry will accompany you to places yet unknown, in service of causes yet undefined. But wherever duty calls, you will carry with you the traditions of your regiments, the support of your comrades, and the gratitude of your nation. These colors will remind you that you serve not just in your own time, but as part of an unbroken chain of service that stretches back through centuries. The ceremony's conclusion began with the singing of the national anthem, led by the Household Cavalry Band, but taken up by every voice present. The ancient words took on new meaning in this military context, as soldiers, families, and guests joined in expressing their loyalty to crown and country. The moment represented a renewal of allegiance that went far beyond the formal oaths taken by individual soldiers. As the anthem concluded, the regiments prepared for their final march past, this time in reverse order of precedence as they departed the quadrangle. The Scots Guards led off, their pipe band adding its distinctive voice to the celebration. Captain MacLeod, still bearing his regiment's new colors, led his soldiers in a final display of precision that left the watching crowd impressed by their skill and bearing. The departure of each regiment created its own emotional moment. Families waved to their soldiers as they marched past, some for the last time before upcoming deployments. Children called out to their fathers and mothers, their voices carrying across the quadrangle with the unconscious joy that marked them as the next generation of military families. The Irish guards followed, their emerald plumes distinctive against the stone walls of the castle. Captain O'Brien felt the weight of his family's military tradition as he led his soldiers past the reviewing stand for the final time. The colors he carried would soon travel with his regiment to their next assignment, wherever duty might call them in an uncertain world. The Coldstream Guards maintained their reputation for precision as they concluded their participation in the ceremony. Major Fletcher's historic role as the first woman to receive colors on behalf of the regiment had been noted by media outlets around the world, but her focus remained on leading her soldiers with the same professional excellence that had characterized the regiment for centuries. The Welsh Guards brought the ceremony to its close with a performance that honored their special relationship with the king. As his own regiment, they had particular reason to take pride in the day's events. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison felt the satisfaction that comes from flawless execution of a complex task. But, more importantly, he felt the renewed sense of purpose that the ceremony had instilled in his soldiers. King Charles remained standing as the final soldiers disappeared through the castle gates, their scarlet tunics and gleaming brass fittings creating one last splash of color against the ancient stones. The quadrangle, which had been filled with music and movement for the past 2 hours, gradually returned to its normal quiet dignity as staff began the process of dismantling the temporary structures erected for the ceremony. The impact of the day extended far beyond its immediate participants. Television coverage had carried images of the ceremony around the world, showcasing British military traditions to international audiences. Social media posts from attending families had shared personal perspectives on the day's events, creating a digital record that complemented the official documentation. In the months that followed, the colors presented that day would become integral parts of regimental life. They would be present at passing out parades for new recruits, deployment ceremonies for soldiers heading overseas, and memorial services for those who made the ultimate sacrifice. The silk flags blessed at Windsor Castle would acquire their own histories through service with their regiments. The ceremony's conclusion marked not an ending, but a beginning. The relationship between King Charles and the British military, formalized through the presentation of colors, would develop and strengthen over the years of his reign. The soldiers who had received those colors would carry them through whatever challenges the future might bring, guided by traditions that had sustained their predecessors through centuries of service. As the last echoes of military bands faded from the castle walls, the eternal bond between crown and sword had been renewed once again. The ancient ceremony had adapted to contemporary realities while maintaining its essential character as a celebration of duty, honor, and service. The colors presented that day would serve as lasting reminders of the covenant between monarch and military, symbols of shared commitment to values that transcended the immediate moment to connect past, present, and future in an unbroken chain of service to nation and crown.